Well, no, we got lost on the way to Virginia. I was on a bus. It was a hockey tournament. I was part of a hockey league. It was called the Special Hockey International Tournament. That is not a joke. They'd already made up the acronym on the shirt before they
Wait, what was the last word?
tournament.
Shit?
This is really tough because unlike Cullen or Blair, I don't really have any kind of expertise when it comes to scores. Like, I mean, Blair actually lives with a composer. So I think you already, by virtue, like by osmosis, I assume that you have kind of a leg up in this conversation. So this is a little intimidating. But I'm just a huge James Newton Howard fan. I love his score for Signs a lot, which I think is really pompous and kind of fun, but almost in a way that's like, you know what I mean? Where it's like a good score that's scary for a PG-13 movie. Like, it's a kind of score that's frightening to kids. And more specific to that demographic in a way that I can't exactly explain why, because it's a score that sounds like the instructions in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, where it's like, make sure your friend's hiding behind the couch so that when you say this word, they go boo. It's like a very fun score. But I would actually say that my favorite James Newton Howard score would probably be Unbreakable, just because I think it's melodramatic. I love the sort of the thing that they sort of evoke with the kind of like percussion driven stuff that kind of gives it this sort of almost like it weirdly enough, it feels perfect for public transit, because I think that I think the percussive stuff, I can't remember if it plays during the opening credits, but when I first recalled like the drum beat actually hitting, Mandy, it's one of your favorite movies, so I might call on you to help me out here in a second, but I'm pretty sure they play that they play that the first time during the subway sequence, and I don't know why. It's so perfectly evocative of being stuck in a crowded subway, like, and just trying to find someone. Like, it's tense, it's claustrophobic, and it's also deeply sad in a lot of ways, which is perfect for a movie that's really about regret and trying to rectify what you feel like is a legacy you never followed through on. So again, not a formalist answer, just a purely subjective, emotional one. I love Howard and anything he does. Unbreakable is probably my pick. So to whoever wants to go next.
I think mine is also a James Newton Howard track.
Ooh,
it's
okay.
King Kong. It's not my favorite score of all time, but it's, I think, one that's very underrated that doesn't really get enough attention. There's a lot of really great work that he does in it, and he kind of mixes like this very 1920s, 30s sounding kind of big orchestra sound with like some really soft stuff. The whole, I mean, if you just listen to the whole, there's a great, I think on YouTube they've got the whole like complete recordings of it, like just like the actual just recordings that the orchestra did, as opposed to like a cut together album. And it's just, yeah, it's like 2 hours of just great stuff that never really weans. I think a big part of it too is just the fact that it's like, it's very much utilizing themes for scenes instead of just kind of having a general broader theme for the whole movie that like will play in different kind of tones throughout scenes. He definitely has like, I don't want to say leitmotifs because they don't really come back up for characters and stuff like that, but it's like that kind of rare film writing where it's like, hey, this scene where, you know, they all fall off the log into the bug pit is going to have its own theme. It's not just going to be a scary version of the King Kong theme. And then the scene where they're dancing in Central Park is going to have its own theme. It's not going to just be a nice version of the King Kong theme. So I think that like, when it comes to just the way that he designed that soundtrack and like really leaned into that kind of old Hollywood aesthetic of like very big brassy, but then also at the same time, as I said, gets really like soft and mellow and kind of tender. I think that, you know, and I think that also he's just a great composer in general. I think that Newton Howard is one of those people that like people don't really come to the top of their head immediately, but is definitely one of the best.
I think it's funny you both mentioned James Newton Howard, because I think, Michael, you chose my favorite score, and Cullen, you chose the score of the director I was going to actually mention. I think something that I really like about music is when, again, those leitmotifs can come back in and change and manipulate based on what's happening narratively, because like the music is just as evocative in the narrative as it is like just simply undertone with the emotion of this, the what's happening. And I think that's very clear in Howard Shore's work in Lord of the Rings. He's exceptionally good at setting up like themes and pieces that evoke single characters, but it's really the transitional work or the manipulated work based on like events going on in the screen and changing that throughout the sequence of the film. That's like especially interesting to me, and that's always what I like seeing is as with like narrative, themes come back up in story, it should happen in music, and he's very good at doing that. And that being said, the Lord of the Rings score can be very large and very present and very like active on screen, but also there's a lot of great subtlety in that is not really paid attention to, but you can sit there, listen to that score, and there's a smaller underpinned piece, and you know exactly what's happening in the film in your mind. And I think that's very telling of a strong score. Again, something to be said is it's very tough for me to put hit the solid nail on the head with this one, given the fact that I live with a composer, and no matter what I answer, she'll say you're wrong. So,
gosh, I'm bad. I'm definitely bad at score. I kept going to soundtrack. Something that came to mind, I guess, would be like Pride and Prejudice, because it's one of my favorite movies from when I was a kid, and there's this scene where Mr. Darcy it's like walking across a field, and it's an incredibly awkwardly long shot of him walking just the field with this like really intense piano playing underneath it. And that's the first thing that popped into my mind as far as like, I don't know if that's even the idea of a best score. I just remember that was the first time that I noticed like, wow, they're like really using the music to try to make this not seem as long as it is. Or maybe to show how long it is. But I was also thinking like the score of Insidious is like really effective as a horror score. Because, and even just it's like in the score, and then also just the general sound design, because they use all these old school horror techniques, and so much of that is like the sound of things. So I don't even know if there's that much score in it. I think I'm just talking about sound design at this point, but I feel like I focus more on like the actual songs than like score. Whenever I think of score, all I can think of is like Inception, which I feel like is the most obvious like Hans Zimmer score that everybody listened to. Like I used to listen to some of those songs when I would run because they just felt good, but it's effective in the movie, but it feels like a very basic answer. But those like four are my answers.
If you don't mind my starting off this portion of the episode, I actually wanted to say, Mandy, you touched on something that was really interesting, like an interesting question, which is just, guys, what is the first time you ever became conscious of a score? And not in a bad way, not because it was distracting, but because you were able to make connections between sort of like the relationships between what you were seeing and what you were hearing. Like to me, it actually was Unbreakable. I think I was in grade 9 when I first saw it, and it was actually sorry, it's not the epilogue. That sounds dismissive. It's like the big twist at the end of the movie. So just for anyone who hasn't seen the movie, I'll try and dance around this. But basically, I know Mandy kind of went, yeah. There's a major reveal where we find out that a relationship between one character and another character isn't what we think it is. And what's incredible about that moment, though, is they don't deploy a menacing score to underscore, okay, this relationship now has a sinister connotation. Instead, they reiterate the heroic theme, like the romantic hero theme, which is to reiterate, okay, this character is now locked into their archetypal role as the hero of their story, which is meant to do battle against evil. And to me, like, I remember getting to the ending of that movie and actually being like, whoa. Like, I didn't, and again, it's not exactly subtle, but it's a very effective way of reinforcing theme, where it's kind of like, well, you wanted to be a hero, now you have it, and the music is sort of like an ironic stamp on that beat. So if you guys have a similar experience to that,
I want to
go ahead.
jump in and point out the moment you're talking about was one of the few times I've terrified my partner while watching a movie, because at that moment I stood up and was screaming, "No! What? No!" at the like, as someone who's very like closed off while I'm watching movies and thinking, that was one of the few times I like just appeared on my feet and was shouting at my television in excitement.
It's an amazing scene, yeah.
I have before I answer your question, Michael, I have 2 fun facts for Mandy and Blair, which you might know. So Blair, did you know that in Lord of the Rings that the record holder for leitmotifs and film scores was John Williams, who had like 80 over the original Star Wars trilogy, and that Howard Shore in The Fellowship of the Ring beat that record he went up to 130 for a single movie. So it's just kind of nuts. And then Mandy, the guy Joseph Bishara, I think his name is the guy that did the score for Insidious, and he also plays the Darth Maul guy.
Really?
Yeah, he's the monster.
That's the thing is, even when I was thinking of Insidious, I was like, I don't think I'm thinking of score so much as like, well, I guess it would be.
I think there's a lot of great like musical cues in Insidious that I think of, like those violins that sort of descend are really nice.
Well, and I always think about the scene where she's in the stairwell and she hears something in the baby monitor, and then there's like sort of a buildup of I think it's strings. There's like a buildup of strings, and then there's like a bang, and then everything goes quiet, and then she runs. And it's very, very like old school horror. Even when the title pops up, it like pops up and it's like, nah! It's like this synth sound. It's very, very like 70s.
But Michael, to answer your question, I think I had this when I took piano as a child. I used to do like all the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, and I used to have the soundtrack as a kid. So I think I would say that was the first one that I like really knew very well. I was probably like 4 or 5 when I got a DVD that had the whole behind the scenes of specifically like Howard Shore's work on those movies, which was really neat. But yeah,
see, something that I wanted to say, but I was like, this is definitely soundtrack, was the opening of Trainspotting. If you guys have seen Trainspotting.
You know what? That's fine. That's an awesome needle drop. The Lust for Life, right?
Well, the drums,
Yeah.
just the like running down the street with the
Ba-doo,
drums.
ba-doo, ba-doo, doo-doo. Yeah, it's.
I think that was the first, because I watched that movie definitely when I was like too young to have watched it, but I just thought that like set the tone in such a great way. But again, I'm like, that's soundtrack, I believe, not score.
Let's make a note going forward that we talk about soundtracks at some point, because I could talk about Phantom of the Paradise's soundtrack for hours.
There's
which
probably a question there already.
Probably.
Any last thoughts?
I realized I goofed. The drums do come in the opening credits of Unbreakable. I just realized that now.
Michael, you're fired.